My name is Jelten Baguet. I work for the Belgian non-profit organization Mpact, which develops and operates shared mobility services. We are one of the partners in the Share North Squared project, and we are the communication lead. Before going into the presentations, I would like to briefly present what the Share North Squared project is about by showing our video. So this is our award-winning video. We've won a small Interreg award with our video, which basically showcases what we want to achieve in our project, namely more park, less parking. We want to reduce car dependency in real estate developments by helping local governments and project developers to integrate shared mobility and to promote its use towards end users. And by doing so, we want to have more sustainability and resource and spatial efficiency, because we need fewer parking spots, of course. We want more shared mobility to support multimodal travel behavior, more affordable housing, less car ownership, less car dependency, and less demand for parking. And parking will be the line running through today's presentations. Who wants this? Well, a nice bunch of people and organizations. We are with 6 cities and 4 sub-partners in the Share North Squared project. The project lead is the Free Hanseatic city of Bremen, which is teaming up with the social housing Gewoba. Stavanger Commune and Columbus local public transport operator are the Norwegian partners. Helsingborgstad in Sweden, the city of Aarhus in Denmark, Gemeente Utrecht in the Netherlands together with AM Real Estate. And in Flanders, we have the city of Mechelen together with Woonland Social Housing. We also have 2 universities that partner in the project, namely Lund University and Université Gustave Eiffel, which will be presenting today. And there's also 3 NGOs, Mpact, which I've just introduced, Way to Go, formerly known as Autodelen.net, and Housing Europe. Now, how do we proceed in this project? We have 4 pillars. We focus on legislation and governments, creating new parking policies, new parking bylaws. We have different pilot sites and living labs where we test, where we experiment with shared mobility in housing and social housing, for instance, and where we also pilot new parking policies. Monitoring and research, that's what we will be discussing today. And of course, there's lots of communication and knowledge transfer. This webinar series, together with our other communication materials, are a part of this. A few housekeeping rules for this presentation. Firstly, the microphones are automatically muted. We would like to ask you to keep the microphones muted and to turn the cameras off during the presentations. If you have questions, you can ask them via the chat. We will follow up on these questions during the Q&A, and in the questions session, you can also raise a hand if you would prefer to ask your question by speaking, but the easiest for us to manage is by writing the question, of course. I would say sit back and relax, because we will be recording this presentation, this webinar, and you will receive the presentations afterwards. So who are the stars of today's webinar? Of course, we have Heythem Adjeroud from Université Gustave Eiffel, who is he is based in Lille in France. He has a PhD from the Université Paul Valéry in Montpellier, is currently a postdoctoral researcher. He focuses on travel behavior, urban transit system, interactions between urbanism and transportation, and way more, but I limit to 3 topics. And for us, he will be comparing some bylaws today. And then in the second part of the webinar, Michael Johansson from Lund University in Sweden will take over. He has also his PhD from Lund. He's been a years-long researcher at Lund who focuses on sustainability strategies, urban planning, and service development. And for us, he will be presenting the impact of parking bylaws. Behind the scenes, there's my colleague Isaura, who is doing the tech support today, and I'm Jelten Baguet. I will be moderating today's session. Before we get started, we would like to point out that we will be focusing on 3 cases in particular, namely Bremen, Utrecht, and Mechelen, because these 3 cities are the most advanced in implementing and developing their parking bylaws. But we will make a comparison. Later we will publish a leaflet, posters with a comparison of the 6 partner cities in our projects. So this being said, I would like to give the floor to Heythem. Heythem, if that's okay for you, you can start sharing your screen.
Can you hear me, Jelten?
I can hear you.
Okay. Just a moment, I will share my screen. I don't know if you have any visibility of my screen now.
Everything's
Great.
working perfectly. Thank you, Heythem.
Yeah. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. As Jelten presented me, I'm a researcher of the Gustave Eiffel University, and today I will be presenting a part of the work we're working on with Michael from Lund University on the assessment of parking standards across the partner cities of the Shall Square project. So special thanks to our partners for taking the time to providing us with all the information needed to frame this comparison framework and the evaluation process that is ongoing. Why are we doing this? So our starting goal is very simple. There is a need that has been expressed by the partner cities to situate themselves. Are they stricter? Are they maybe doing less than other partners? But also as academics, we already know from the scientific literature that parking bylaws are directly impacting and shaping car ownership and by extent our capacity to go toward a transition towards more sustainable modes of mobility. So the objective behind this is to provide insight that may help us go into a future with better integration of shared mobility, with the promotion of intermodality, but also optimization of the land use in our cities. How are we tackling this? It was mainly a review of all the regulatory frameworks and documentations at the European, the national level, but especially the local bylaws of each of our partner cities. We also held a series of one-on-one interviews with our partner cities and some housing developers that allows us to design a comparison framework that is based on a structured net of indicators, but also on some levers that are common into the regulatory framework of the cities we try to work on. So our comparison framework is mainly based on these common regulatory levers we identified through the lectures, through the reading of the regulatory frameworks of each city, but also through the interviews we've had with the cities. It's mainly the zoning principles, the norms that are already in place for car and bike parking in the housing development projects. Maybe the most important one is the management strategy of the mobility and parking bylaws. What are the integrated concepts cities are adopting? What are the planning tools? And this mainly relies on the infrastructure provisions, but also some compensation mechanisms that are put in place in order to help developers get rid of some percentages of parking places that are usually constructed for car owners and going forward towards more shared means of transportation. The last one is communication. It's mainly dissemination and spreading awareness and education within the spectrum of all the stakeholders, developers, residents, and everybody who acts on the mobility policies. So, as Jelten stated, we will be focusing on three cities that are more advanced in that matters, who are Bremen, Mechelen, and Utrecht. From a zoning perspective, we see that a same pattern repeats itself in most of the cities within the project. We have 3 to 4 zones with usually the core areas and the city centers who have more densely urban forms tend to have less parking provisions, and the more we go in the peripheral areas, we have parking norms that tend to go higher. We see, for example, that in Utrecht, the innovation is that there are 2 subzones to each zones. For zone B, for example, it is a differentiation of paid parking zones and different tariffs. And in A and C zones, it's mainly differentiation based on urban density, but also proximity to public transportation and public transit. So about the parking norms, we have 3 good students, I would say, from the project. So we can see that parking norms in the 3 cities start quite low, with minimums at 0.25 in Bremen, 0.27 in Mechelen, and 0.1 in Utrecht. In Utrecht, we have minimums that also are maximums, so developers are not allowed to construct more than that. And it's usually the case, basically, in most of the projects in the 3 cities. The innovation here is also that the maximum threshold is also fixed to fix the required parking that is allowed to be built on site, specifically in very densely populated areas. In zone A, we can attend 100% of the parking provision that is not allowed to be constructed on site, and then the developers need to provide parking elsewhere. For bike parking, this is very ambitious, but we also see different approaches. In Bremen, it is provision per surface area of the residential unit. For Mechelen, is more of a number of parking places per residential unit, and for Utrecht it's more of a lockable storage of certain surface for each dwelling. So different approaches, but same, I would say, goals. And at the end, we have here examples of cities that go forward towards more space for bikes and other shared modes than for car parking spaces. From a mobility management point of view, we're starting with Mechelen. We saw that the city adopts a very normative approach, which is very clear and simple to implement, and it's an approach that is also very ambitious. Mechelen make it mandatory to integrate car sharing into new housing developments with a parking provision of a minimum 12 parking places. And it also provides a set of fixed replacement ratios according to the zones that go up to 7 traditional parking spaces replaced by 1 shared car. And in that case, developers tend to construct way less parking spaces than in a usual case. So from an infrastructure point of view, in Mechelen, the parking places are meant to be constructed by the developer, and they need at all times to be publicly accessible and equipped with charging and internet, and clearly in view to signage from the exterior of the project. Compensation mechanisms rely on the possibility for the developers to buy out all the parking places for a fixed fee of 5,000 euros for the project with less than 12 parking places, and to buy only the 2 first parking places for 4,000 euros for all the buildings. One shared car sharing is mandatory. And most importantly, developers are meant to pay a fee of 30,000 euros per missing shared car or shared parking place for a shared car. On the other hand, we have more flexible approaches in the cases of Bremen, for example. Here we have a mandatory mobility management concept that needs to be implemented according to the zones to 25% in the more peripheral area of Bremen of the parking provision, and goes up to 75% of the parking provision in central areas that need to be replaced through one of the options of the mobility management concept that has been implemented through the Bremen's parking bylaw. So in that case, developers tend to have more options, but no option is mandatory. So you have either to build a parking space or pay a fee to the city for the missing parking spaces, or integrate any solution that is meant to replace the parking provision, integrate shared mobility, offer shared mobility subscription or public transport subscriptions. And on the side of the infrastructure, we see that in Bremen, the parking places are still to be constructed by the developer, but things get more optional since the car sharing is preferably accessible for the general public, but it's not mandatory. For the compensation mechanisms, Bremen incentivizes the developers to construct less and invest more into other means of transportation, because they allow them to pay 40% of the average construction cost in Bremen, which is 31,000 euros in the central areas. So they pay 12,000 euros approximately in zone 1 and 2, and 5,600 euros to the city in zone 3. And they have the choice to not pay, but either reinvest it into shared mobility or other forms of alternative, such as public transportation, for example. In Utrecht, we have nearly the same spirit. The mobility management is quite flexible, but mobility management plans are mandatory starting from the permit phase of any project. The differences is that in Utrecht, as stated earlier, the municipality can prohibit construction of any parking places in some areas, and that is a form of regulation that obliges the developers to find alternatives in other sites by providing off-site parking, or maybe also invest into alternative modes of transportation. So obviously car sharing and bike sharing is highly incentivized. And from a compensation mechanism point of view, it is quite the same with Bremen. So you can replace it with bicycle parking, more shared mobility, but also peripheral and at a distance parking for the areas where no new construction for parking places is allowed. The little innovation here is also that Utrecht is currently in a research phase to create an accessibility fund to which the developers can contribute in place of construction parking places, in order to ensure that the city retains the control over the implementation of mobility solutions. So what do we make of these readings we had, the discussions? Is that mainly we see that there is a trend of cities that are moving away from minimum parking towards maximum parking standards. So we no longer have minimum provision to build, and we have the liberty to construct way more. Now we have maximum standards, and the most ambitious of our cities are even going towards tradable parking. So you can not construct any parking at all, or maybe replace a part of the parking you need to construct with other means of mobility and transportation. We saw that there's a delay observed among the cities, with the cities of Aarhus and Helsingborg and Stavanger that are not presented here in this presentation, but we know that things are moving. Some of the cities are already revising their parking bylaws, integrating replacement possibilities for up to 20% of the parking provisions with shared mobility. But also we see that different level of flexibility exist also within the cities that are more advanced. Some of them are more ambitious with making things mandatory. Others are offering better options, or more option, not better. But we see that the strictly normative approaches also tend to generally be easier to implement. This is something to be confirmed with our interactions with the cities, while more flexible ones tend to be maybe more complex and resource consuming, because from what we saw, the mobility bylaws and the parking bylaws tend to be a little bit complex and need some explanation work to be done with the developers and residents in order to make everyone happy. But we are ending on a positive note. There is the first feedbacks that tell us that in Bremen, for example, the first pilot sites already show very good levels of car ownership that are decreasing compared to other sites where users tend to have high car ownership levels. We already know also that Utrecht has now the highest number of per capita of shared cars in a municipality in the Netherlands, and this is something we can build on towards the future. So I will end my presentation with this chart that that allows us to see that where cities tend to situate themselves in terms of flexibility of the norms and the parking bylaws, but also in terms of complexity. The more flexible the bylaw is, the more maybe complex and resource consuming it might be. But this is not at all an evaluation of the effectiveness of the parking bylaw. It's more of a way to visualize the challenges that might be linked to it. The effectiveness is something to be evaluated by the evaluation framework we are working on right now and that Michael might be presenting in the next presentation. So this is my part of the presentation, and I will be happy to pass the floor to Michael.
Thank you so much, Heythem. Then you can start by changing the slide. So in the research within the Chain of Squared project or framework, our aim is, as Heythem mentioned, to measure, understand the long-term impact of parking bylaws and its related infrastructure. We believe that parking is not just a technical or logistic issue, it's a very strategic urban planning challenge with a far-reaching consequences of different perspectives. And that is something that we will address very briefly here in the next couple of slides. But together with Heythem, we are taking the next scientific step to calibrate this kind of new data that we have achieved, and also have the input of examples. Also looking for more peer-reviewed sources and other relevant materials. Begins with the process that we just achieved with identifying and comparing parking regulations to understand the potential effect, just as Heythem presented. Ultimately, we will try to develop a comprehensive framework for measuring the true long-term costs of urban parking infrastructure, especially when it comes to economic, environmental, and social, and of course, opportunity cost over a 30-year life cycle. This work also aligns with the EU sustainability goals and the European Green Deal. So what we will focus on is both underground, above ground, and also on surface parking facilities. And by the way, why does this actually matters? Well, of course, we know that high land value drives pressure for optimal use of space. Poor planning can lead to congestion, environmental stress, and social inequality, while efficient land use supports sustainability, of course, accessibility and resilience. So beginning with the next slide, the examples that we will illustrate today is a simplified example of the case of Bremen. We just started this kind of calculations and impact assessment. But in this case, we have the Bremen as the case. We are looking on the next couple of slides about surface parking, which will facilitate 100 parking spaces, just to frame the examples that we will look at here. And also very important parameters to understand and have back in our minds is that this projection is based on a daily parking fee of 10 euros, also an annual maintenance cost of 1,800 per space. And we assume that the land value is 343 euros per square meter. So what we can say is that we are very interested in see the impact of parking over time. This, of course, includes direct costs such as maintenance, land use, but also indirect effects like carbon emissions, heat island contribution, and loss of important ecosystem services. So we want to do a comprehensive assessment framework that bridges more or less the gap between this kind of academic research and practical decision making to more or less accelerate the transition towards more sustainable urban land use patterns. So I can also in this slide mention that if we look very briefly on the economical impact, we can see the O&M, which is more or less the cost for annual operations and maintenance, which usually range between 3 to 5%. So we have essential costs going year by year by year that we perhaps not always have in considerations when we're actually putting the specific price on the parking space. So you can change slide Heythem. So what can we actually do with land instead of producing 100 parking spaces? Well, our calculation based on that one parking space is taking 20 square meters. I know that we in a different perspectives talk that the specific parking place is 12.5 square meters, but we also know that we need some sort of infrastructure to steer the car into the parking place, and that is something that we have in consideration when we do these kind of calculations. So we can use this kind of space for, of course, green space, urban parks, of course, residential housing. We can even build, for example, a bike path network, but also we could also ease up the possibility to have some sort of mixed use development if we use the parking bylaws that Heythem just presented. So we can see a lot of very interesting benefits, and it becomes much more interesting when we see these over time. We will have a lot of emissions still going. We will have a lot of loss of economical costs, for example, depending on what kind of situation we are focusing on. So we can also say that when we talk about the opportunity costs, it's most often reveals that alternative land uses greater economic value and of course social value compared to parking infrastructure. So the alternatives is much more valuable in a longer term perspective. So we think that having the approach or agenda on understanding the opportunity costs also helps to evaluate whether parking is the highest and best use of valuable urban land. So you can change slide Heythem. Here we can see that we quantify the social cost of parking infrastructure over this kind of 30 years period. And this includes, of course, not only financial costs, but also externalities such as emissions, noise, and reduced walkability. All of these included in these figures. So we can in general say that this kind of social costs or the quantified impact of externalities on public welfare, the cost for someone else in the society to bear due to that I take the car, use the parking, and contribute to perhaps not always the sustainable city landscape that we really want to address. We think that this kind of also a holistic approach is essential for aligning urban development with, of course, which is very important, transparency, sustainability, climate neutrality, and also that we will focus on public health objectives as well. Not only see the parking space as some sort of isolated product, but see it as some sort of service instead. And that is very interesting to have that kind of approach as well. You can change slide Heythem. Yes, very, very briefly, here is an example of if we still have to do this kind of parking infrastructure, we can actually complement it with other parts that makes it more sustainable. So what we can see here is two examples of using solar panels, for example, on the actual built parking space, which will generate quite interesting CO2 impact reduction of emissions, for example. You have a break-even point of this when we talk about 100 parking spaces for almost 30 years. What we also can say is that if you would reduce the parking and also instead add residential commercial space, we could also have a very nice, interesting revenue impact instead, and have quite some positive net benefits instead of having red numbers in the lines here. So you can take the next slide, Heythem. So what can we see here is that we are dealing with quite some money costs, no matter if it's environmental related costs or social cost, or still very direct or even indirect economical costs. We can and we want to address, as Heythem mentioned, some sort of suggestions or recommendations for municipalities to actually gain more value for the actual money input. So this is just two examples on what benefits we could have to add green infrastructure and actually work with nature, not against nature, because that would cost a lot of unfortunately money. And also if we want, for example, plant more trees for reduce the urban heat island effect, we will also have a lot of not least CO2 emission savings per year. And it's, as we can see, quite well spent money to actually work with this kind of measurements or improvements in the actual urban environment. So that was more or less the quick crash course that me and Heythem are working on. Just to summarize very briefly, is that we have and we will wrapping up our parking assessment report that perhaps Heythem can say a couple of more words if you want to, but that is something that we will hopefully present just before the new year here. And then now we are stepping into the step 2, where we actually want to understand, measure, and value this kind of parking bylaws that we have identified by our project partners. What kind of effect will this have in a long-term perspective? So, Heythem, I give the word to you here in the summary, just to say what have we missed something?
Yeah, so thank you, Michael, for the part of the presentation that was very clear. If I had one thing to add, is it's very complementary, but these two parts of the work are part of the same perspective we have. So the understanding of the parking bylaws allows us to provide the cities with an overview of what's happening across the project, and allow them to compare themselves to other possibilities they could maybe integrate into the proper parking bylaws. But there is also the issue of transferability, and these comparisons of multiple cases may allow cities to pick the best practices from a set of from different bylaws in different cities that allows them better integration into the local context. And the evaluation framework also is a two-part framework, which is meant to allow the cities to build a set of good arguments when they go out and talk to the developers and the politicians and also residents, in order to enable the will to go towards more sustainable urban planning. So the city-specific impact assessment would be a set of indicators that is specific to some maybe pilot sites to the development projects themselves, and will need maybe years to be assessed and measured. We need time to maybe observe the changes in mobility behaviors, in car ownership levels, in substitution ratios, for example, for the car sharing solutions. But the environmental and societal impacts you have presented allows maybe a broader set of municipalities to just say that there are inherent impacts of reducing parking spaces that are in some ways inevitable, and we can't really go behind them. So if you replace a parking space, there is usually an impact on the improvement of the quality of life of the residents and the from an environmental point of view. So this is the comprehensive structure of the comparison, but also the evaluation process we're working on right now. So thank you for listening, everyone. And if you have any questions, I think me and Michael would be pleased to answer.
Yes, thank you very much, Michael. Thank you very much, Heythem, for your presentations and for the excellent timing. The idea is indeed now to go to the questions of the audience. Let's just take them in chronological order. The first one was a question about shared cars in Utrecht. And do you know what the division is between station-based and free-floating in the case of this city? If not, we can always ask this directly to our contacts in Utrecht, of course, and get back to Mr. Weiland.
I think we need to have a look at this in detail on all the times, because this is not something that is very specified through the parking bylaws we had the chance to analyze. But from what we saw in Utrecht, I think I don't know if you agree, Michael, but a big part of the parking of the shared cars in Utrecht are looked for me as station-based car sharing solutions. So we might maybe have a look more in detail into this to be able to make an assessment of a ratio between how much is free floating and how much is station based. Yeah.
Okay, let's jump then to the next question asked by Mrs. Lay. Do you have an article describing the full methodology of your assessment so that they could reproduce it at home?
I can take that one. Very good question, Anne. And me and Heythem will come back during the spring. Then we will provide you with a report, a scientific report, but we also will introduce you to actually use or try this kind of digital application that we are at the moment working on. So a little bit of a classic cliffhanger. Just wait and just watch our newspapers in the General Square project, and we will come back when we feel that we have calibrated and have the overall understanding that the digital framework actually works like we want to. So have a little bit patience, but it's a very good question. Thank you, Anne.
But if you want to remain informed about everything we produce with the projects, you can follow our website, or even easier is to follow us on LinkedIn, where we give regular updates on what's happening in the project. And as soon as this document is available, we will of course publish it on our channels. Next question, we have an architect in the room, Mr. Fernandez, and he's asking, have you come across any discussion in municipalities of implementing some kind of incentive like property tax for existing buildings to allocate car sharing space within their existing car parks? So are there any incentives that are given to developers? I'll let you choose who takes the question.
From what we saw, at least Mechelen already has a set of tax incentives that most of them concerns developers and more specifically, and it's more not naturally the new projects and their developments. So if developers choose to not construct a lot of parking spaces, they have tax incentives, and they tend to be highly incentivized by the city of Mechelen to not to do so through their tax codes. So we don't really know if there are any, at least from the tax code, it doesn't appear to be to have some incentives towards the residents themselves regarding the property tax, for example. But yeah, these are might be some very good levers to rely on. But for the moment, yeah, so that Mechelen already has tax incentives for developers, but for residents, we don't think this is something that had been already implemented. So I don't know if you, Michael, have seen anything.
Now I can just also add that, for example, here in Sweden, I know that I think it's in March or April, there will be a VAT on 25% on every parking in Sweden, which wasn't the case today or previously. I see that we have an audience with some of the Swedish representatives who obviously can more about that than me, but I am very interested to see how this VAT could actually affect car ownership in a long-term perspective, because in some way, I think all of these kind of extra costs on having privately owned cars must in some way have some sort of spillover effect, that tenants or inhabitants actually understand that, oh, it costs quite much money to actually use one or even two cars, which is the case in some of our project partner cities. So I think that is also a question that we will follow up and look a little bit more into detail to Heythem. So yeah, thank you so much for good question, Rafael.
We have another question by Mrs. Lay. It's basically two questions about Mechelen. So one, did you evaluate the use of the car sharing in Mechelen, where it is mandatory to build car sharing parking in housing? And then the follow-up question is, isn't this number too high compared to classical parking?
That's right. So yeah, it's a two-part question. We don't really have all the data to be able to evaluate how car sharing is being used in Mechelen at this point. I hope our partners locally will be able to provide this type of information in order to be able to evaluate this. But by extent, are we providing way more parking provision for car sharing than what is really needed? So yeah, is it too high? We don't think so. In the most central areas, one shared car replaces 7 parking spaces, and in the periphery, it's more one shared car replaces 4 parking spaces. But this is it looks like a lot, but car sharing is only mandatory for buildings that have parking provision of more than 12 car parking spaces, and a lot of the housing units in Mechelen are individual housing units, or buildings with less than that level of provision. So yeah, but we obviously need to see how these car sharing solutions have been used in Mechelen currently. But yeah, the evaluation might need some time. So it doesn't look high to me right now, but maybe the use cases would show different results.
Thank you, Heythem. Let's move to the next question, which is a question from Michael to Michael. There's two Michaels in the room. The question is, how did you calculate the quite high annual maintenance costs for parking? Could you elaborate a bit on that, Michael?
Yes, of course. Nice question, Michael the Great and Michael the First, as always. Well, I can actually send you the link to the reference, and what I remember is that the reference was in some way illustrated as figures in between. So perhaps I was a little bit high on these calculations. I'm not sure, but I just wanted to just throw something in the air to see where it actually lands. But of course, it's quite some high maintenance cost. I am aware of that, but I can send you the link to the reference after this presentation.
Thank you.
Next question is from Mr. Fabian Kuster. It's, I would say, a philosophical or maybe even a political question. Namely that compensation measures carry the underlying message that providing abundant car parking is still the norm. And he would like to know whether we shouldn't move towards settings with lower car parking maximums by default, complemented by mandatory sustainable mobility requirements.
Yeah, it's definitely a political question. If we look at the historic evolution of parking provisions, the norms are already going way lower than the traditional ones, especially in the continental cases. So both in Bremen, Mechelen, or Utrecht, car parking standards are kept going lower and lower, and we start having maximum levels that are quite low, especially in very densely populated areas. And cities also keep telling us that there is like a lot of political lobbying going around the fact that developers need to build more parking spaces because the car industry needs also to work, and a lot of parameters tend to enter into the discussion. There's also a lot of municipality revenue in some cases that comes from car parking and paid car parking in cities. So there's obviously an arbitrage to be done, and it's definitely a matter of political courage, because we already see in the cities that are more advanced that at some point in time they did take the decision to lower the standards or make some measures mandatory, and usually the at least the users tend to adopt. So it's definitely a political. There's definitely political dimension to it, and some cities tend to have more facilities to. They tend to take decisions easier because of the local context, and from within the project we already see differences. For example, with the Scandinavian countries where car ownership is higher, so norms are declining, but do we have really the ability to just split in half the number of parking places? This definitely needs a lot of political courage. Yeah.
Okay, there's another question by Gustav. I've asked for some clarification, so let's get back to that question in a few minutes.
Yes, I can just add that very good advice or suggestion to really look into this kind of other political or economical perspectives. And we just come to think about that we are working on trying to implement the insurance cost is one also examples that we didn't whatsoever address today. and also the reinsurance cost, the effects for the tenants when we actually have more extreme weather conditions, which can affect the insurance of the specific vehicles, depending on what kind of facility we are talking about. So there is also one scope that I think could be interesting to present as some sort of political recommendation that if you do this, you have this kind of beneficial political incitements as well.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. Another question by Mrs. Anne-Séverine Ley. How does Mechelen ensure that the car sharing parking spots are effectively provided with a shared car?
I think Mechelen are working very closely with the developers, and they're monitoring the ongoing projects in a very close way. One thing maybe we didn't mention is that in Mechelen, a mandatory mobility assessment is mandatory also. A mandatory mobility assessment is required at the permit phase of any project, and the developers need to choose and decide what type of provision they want to construct and what type of services they are offering. So I think Mechelen have been able to control what is the exact number of car sharing parking spots that have been effectively provided by the developers. Maybe it's worth mentioning that the parking bylaw is quite recent also, so I don't think a lot of projects have already been considered by these subjects, and it might be maybe a bigger challenge in the future the more and more the projects tend to be in place. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Heythem. And then let's go to the last questions. No worries, Anne-Séverine. So the last question by Gustav is, yes, what are the political costs for politicians to decide on one thing over another? And this actually aligns with a question that I had as well. Like, if you look at the figures that you showed, you could objectively say, like, there's a good case for reducing the amount of parking. It has health benefits. It will reduce the prices of constructing housing, social housing. But then again, as soon as we start talking parking during elections, it's a very sensitive topic. No matter when you're living in a big town or a small town, it's always a big debate. So I like this question about the political costs and what are these political costs to decide on having more parks and less parking, and how could we convince voters to not that I want to push people in one certain direction, but how can we inform the audience about the bigger picture that's at stake when we're talking about parking?
Will you start, Heythem, and then I can continue?
I think it might be also a task of communication and dissemination by the municipalities, especially ones that already have a lot of pilot projects and they on which they already have some sort of feedback from the residents and the users, because people already usually are afraid of changes and they think they rely a lot on their cars, and that the parking space they have underground or at the exterior goes, they will be in a big trouble. But in Bremen, for example, we already have feedback from people that already replaced their cars and that are being very happy with it, especially with the set of options they have and the other mobility solutions they might be provided with. We obviously need to have a shift in mobility behavior of the general public before you can enforce things on politicians, because usually there are like a lot of electoral challenges that might get in the way, but also a lot of lobbying from some industries, so it's a quite a hard topic to deal with, but it definitely needs a lot of communication and dissemination, especially about the good practices that have been implemented, at least in some pilot sites, and the good experiences that we can, for example, find within the Share Not Squared project across the 6 cities we're analyzing.
I could just also very briefly add that what we also noticed is when we talk about the costs, which is more or less what the politicians or the local decision makers want to have some sort of information. We know that the different values is harder to put monetary value on than others. I come to think about green urban space, for example. It's very subjective. It's more about attitudes and things like that. So it's always been on the hard fact that a parking space costs like this, then you could relate to that politically very good. But if we will add also this kind of more not so easy valuation of other urban geographies, I think it could be a benefit for making the right decisions based on the real cost of building parking space.
Thank you very much, Michael, for the additions. Before wrapping up this meeting, I would like everyone to stay tuned via our channels. Firstly, because you will be informed about the next webinar that we will organize in spring, so follow our channels to learn more about that. You can also watch our previous webinars on our website. We have a podcast series called The Low Carb Diet, where you, well, if you don't want to watch something, you can always listen while cooking or running or so. We have a news page where you can also read more about the latest developments in the project. We will also communicate about the comparison framework on that page. And we have lots of resources on our website. And which is new since a few days is our Theory Corner. It's a dictionary where we present different mobility concepts or concepts from philosophy, from sociology, and show you how they link to urban planning. So click on it and you will learn what the egg of Columbus has to do with mobility and parking policies. And the easiest way to stay tuned is following our LinkedIn page or enrolling to our newsletter. So that's it. Thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you to both of our speakers, Heythem and Michael, for the excellent, very dense, very content-rich presentations and the stimulating discussion afterwards. If you have content-related questions, you can always reach out to our 2 guests of today. And for practical matters, feel free to reach out to me. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon and hope to see you soon. Bye.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Goodbye.